For months after Pearl Harbor, Japan's military leadership believed one thing with absolute certainty: the American mainland was too far away, and Japan itself was untouchable. The Imperial Japanese Navy had struck the most powerful fleet in the Pacific and walked away nearly unscathed. Battleships burned, airfields were crippled. American morale, they believed, had been shattered. In Tokyo, senior officers spoke confidently of a long war, one that would be decided far from Japanese cities, far from Japanese civilians. There was no fear of retaliation. American bombers, they were told, simply could not reach Japan. Even if they tried, they would be detected, intercepted, and destroyed long before they posed a threat. The Pacific was vast. Japan's defenses were prepared. The enemy, in their view, lacked both the capability and the courage. When intelligence reports suggested the Americans might attempt a strike, many Japanese leaders dismissed the idea outright. It was impossible, and even if it happened, it would be symbolic at best. They laughed. What they didn't know was that, thousands of miles away, a quiet and deeply unconventional plan was already underway. It began not with aircraft but with humiliation. In the weeks after Pearl Harbor, the United States was desperate for something it had lost: initiative. The American public demanded a response. Military leaders needed proof that Japan could be reached, that the war was not confined to distant islands and naval engagements. President Franklin D. Roosevelt wanted a strike that would do more than destroy targets. He wanted a message. That message would come from the air. The problem was simple and brutal. No American bomber had the range to fly from a friendly base, strike Japan, and return. Every conventional plan ended the same way, with aircraft running out of fuel over the ocean. Then someone proposed an idea so risky it sounded absurd. Medium bombers, launched from an aircraft carrier. One-way missions if necessary. Most experts said it could not be done. Army bombers were not designed for carrier decks. Their takeoff runs were too long, their wings too heavy, the margin for error non-existent. But one man believed otherwise. Lieutenant Colonel James Harold Doolittle was not chosen because he was reckless. He was chosen because he understood aircraft better than almost anyone alive. He believed that with the right training, the right conditions, and absolute precision, the impossible might just be survivable. 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers were selected. They were stripped down, modified, every unnecessary pound removed. Crews trained relentlessly to take off in distances that seemed suicidal. They practiced again and again, knowing that a single mistake would send them into the sea. Still, even as the plan took shape, Japanese leadership remained unaware and unconcerned. There were no blackout drills in Tokyo, no reinforced air defenses, no expectation of attack. Japan's war planners believed the enemy was still reeling, still defensive, still afraid. They believed the next explosions would fall on American soil. They were wrong. On the morning of April 18, 1942, the aircraft carrier USS Hornet was still hundreds of miles from Japan when the decision was made. The task force had been spotted. The bombers would launch early or not at all. One by one, the B-25s roared down the carrier deck and lifted into the air, disappearing into the gray horizon. There was no turning back. Fuel calculations were already tight. Every extra mile reduced the chances of survival. Ahead of them lay the unthinkable: Japan. As the bombers approached the coastline, Japanese radar operators detected something strange: aircraft where none were expected. At first, the reports were confused. The altitude was wrong. The flight path made no sense. No alarms were sounded. No fighters scrambled in time. By the time civilians looked up, it was already too late. The first explosion struck Tokyo without warning. Factories burned. Military installations erupted in flame. Sirens wailed through streets that had never imagined war would come to them. Anti-aircraft guns fired blindly into the sky, searching for enemies they had never believed possible. For the first time in modern history, Japan's capital was under attack, and the laughter inside Japan's high command stopped instantly. Inside the Imperial Palace, reports of the air raid spread quickly. Maps were unfurled, red pins marking locations where bombs had fallen. Military advisors spoke in urgent, clipped tones, each word betraying disbelief. Tokyo, the heart of Japan's power, had been touched by an enemy they considered powerless. The psychological impact was immediate. Senior leaders who had scoffed at the notion of an American strike now faced a simple, undeniable truth: the war was no longer distant. It was here. They had planned for defense against invasions, not for attacks on the home islands. Their confidence, built on years of victories across the Pacific, began to crumble. Japanese commanders had always relied on the assumption that geography was their ally, that the vast ocean would protect them. But the Doolittle raid shattered that illusion. News of the bombers spread faster than the fires themselves. Civilians reported seeing shadows in the sky, hearing the distinctive drone of the B-25 engines before any explosions occurred. While the physical damage was limited, only a handful of factories suffered critical destruction. The shock to morale was profound. For the first time, the Japanese public realized that the American war machine was not only capable but daring. The audacity of flying medium bombers from an aircraft carrier, striking the enemy capital, and hoping to reach safety elsewhere was unprecedented. The military response was chaotic. Fighters scrambled too late. Anti-aircraft guns fired blindly, often too high or too low. Plans that had been rehearsed for years suddenly seemed useless in the face of a new, unpredictable enemy. The very men who had once laughed at American bombers now confronted the reality that every laugh had been premature. The raid forced Japanese commanders to reconsider their strategy. Resources were diverted to reinforce air defenses around major cities. Fighter squadrons that had been stationed for offensive operations were recalled for homeland defense. Every subsequent decision now carried the weight of this new vulnerability. Even beyond Tokyo, the raid resonated strategically. Midway, 6 weeks later, commanders could no longer underestimate American resolve. The psychological shift triggered by a mere 16 bombers directly influenced Japanese decisions in the battles that followed. Confidence, once a constant in Japanese calculations, was replaced by caution, doubt, and a creeping awareness that the Americans were only beginning to fight. For the pilots of the raid, the risk was immense. Most would not return to American soil. Some were captured, others perished at sea. Yet the operation's legacy extended far beyond the individual fates of the crew. It proved that Japan's capital was not untouchable, that American ingenuity could overcome distance and convention, and that the war had entered a new phase, one where psychological impact could rival physical destruction. The laughter in Tokyo's command rooms had ended. In its place was something far more dangerous: fear. And from fear came urgency, a reevaluation of tactics, resources, and assumptions that would alter the trajectory of the Pacific War. For the 16 B-25 crews, the operation was already a gamble from the moment their wheels left the carrier deck. Each bomber weighed heavily with bombs and stripped-down fuel tanks, calculated to the inch. The pilots had trained endlessly for a short, precise takeoff, yet nothing could replicate the reality of the open sea and the impossibility of turning back. As they flew toward the Japanese coast, every mile tested endurance and nerves. Strong winds tossed the bombers, engines threatened to overheat, and radio silence left crews alone with the immense responsibility of their mission. Navigation was treacherous. The faint outlines of islands and currents were all that guided them toward targets they could barely see. Some pilots struggled with fear, others with exhaustion, but all understood that survival depended on discipline and courage. One miscalculation could mean plunging into the ocean. Each bomber represented a delicate balance between skill and luck. Upon reaching Tokyo, visibility was poor. Smoke and haze obscured the cityscape, yet the crews pressed on. Each crew had specific targets: factories, supply depots, oil refineries. Bombs were released with precision, every explosion a direct challenge to Japan's sense of security. For the people below, the chaos was disorienting, terrifying, and unforgettable. Japanese air defenses scrambled belatedly. Fighters attempted interception, but the bombers had already passed critical points. Anti-aircraft fire found only shadows in the gray sky. The psychological victory of simply striking the capital outweighed the minimal physical damage. As the raid concluded, the bombers turned toward recovery points in China. Many faced mechanical failures, fuel shortages, and enemy pursuit. Some crews crash-landed or bailed out over unfamiliar terrain. Others were captured by Japanese forces. Yet the news of their daring mission spread faster than any report of casualties. The audacity alone had sent a message that resonated across the Pacific. Back in Tokyo, commanders were forced to rethink the war entirely. The raid had proven that distance and geography no longer guaranteed safety. Japan's most secure cities could be reached, and the Americans were willing to risk everything to strike them. Fear replaced complacency, and planning became increasingly reactive. Strategically, the raid set in motion a chain of events that would influence the Battle of Midway. Japan's leadership now had to allocate fighters and resources to homeland defense, weakening offensive operations elsewhere. Decisions that might have seemed optimal before were now compromised by the new threat of American air power. For historians, the Doolittle raid remains a remarkable example of how daring, calculated risk can reshape a conflict, not through sheer destruction, but through the subtle yet powerful force of perception. It shocked an empire, altered strategy, and proved that even the most secure opponents could be vulnerable to ingenuity and courage. Among the 16 crews, each mission carried its own story of courage and survival. Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle himself navigated the lead bomber with a steady hand, fully aware that one misjudged wind or miscalculated fuel could end everything. Every pilot behind him mirrored that focus, each decision weighing not only on their lives but on the symbolic impact of the raid. Some bombers faced immediate mechanical failures. Engines sputtered under the strain of the long flight, and propellers sometimes vibrated violently, threatening structural integrity. Pilots pressed on regardless, driven by months of preparation and a singular mission objective: show Japan the United States could reach them, and that the war was far from over. When crews reached the Chinese coast, many faced a new danger: unfamiliar terrain, hostile forces, and the inevitability of capture or death. Some crash-landed in remote villages. Others parachuted into jungles. Local Chinese civilians risked their lives to help the stranded,